Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very exciting episode of You Don't Jazz No Varies. Man, I had to get in my black Luthor gear for this one, man, because this one is turn up time, baby. And I am the host, the Impact Player, and with me on my left is Miss Lady K. Like how I said, today is a very special epi indeed, baby. Kind of like episode 4 and 5, the 5th episode marked the midway point of our season. But this epi, we already know we're going to receive controversial attention more or less like the 2 previous episodes because of how much faith we place in the American system and also the world system as well, which is heavily dictated by America as well as England. We must say we're not sorry, baby. We'll never be sorry for this, but we're not sorry for the information that has been put out there thus far, because we never cussed, fussed, or degraded anything or anyone while we're doing this. Okay, so keep that in mind. More or less, we show the viewers hidden information and or the whole operation of how things work. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about, are scholarships really free? To answer this question, we need to go back in time to the BC or BCE time period to find out the origins of education. When did it? How did it? Why did it start? And what was education intended for? How did it become a multi-billion-dollar corporation as we know it to be today? Now I leave it to my colleague, Miss Lady K, to start us off with the origins of education.
Thanks, Impact. Now I'm going to tell you what a scholar is, what jobs they hold, and some more important history about the origins of education. So let's start off with what a scholar is. According to dictionary.com and other internet sources, a scholar is a specialist in a particular branch of study, especially the humanities, and distinguished academics. So let's highlight a time in BC or BCE era, in a time period, a very unique position to what was the scholar, and how did early scholars live, how did they earn a living. From all the information we found, most scholars, especially in ancient Greece BC time, did not make their money from teaching. So how did they make their money? Many of them were already from wealthy families and they didn't need to work. There were also quite a few that had wealthy patrons that would pay their expenses. Others would work different jobs during the day. They started cults and even literally lived off the street through begging. Most noticeable scholars during this time were Prometheus, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Alexander the Great. Prometheus was a teacher of Socrates, who was a teacher of Plato, who was a teacher of Aristotle, who was the teacher of Alexander the Great. And a fun fact about these early day scholars are Prometheus didn't actually have a teacher, or there's no record of one that we could find anyways. One of the first institutions of higher learning was Plato's School of Philosophy, that was founded in about 385 BC at Academia, which is a sanctuary of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and skill, just north of Athens, Greece, in the gymnasium. Before this was an academy, Plato used to give lectures in his garden for free where people could gather, listen, and share their thoughts. Most schools were labeled as academies in ancient Greece, which actually comes from the Athenian hero Academos. So, I guess it's safe to say that the concept of going to school and getting smarter, not stronger, came from Greece and Italy. We can also see why their empire met an early demise as well. But we wonder, when did we change the name from academies to schools to colleges and to universities?
Now, book. We touched upon it a little bit in the last segment. But let's go over the evolution of schools. Let's highlight if we could find evidence on who decided we should call academies high schools or universities/colleges. So we talked about Plato creating the first academy in 385 BC. There are, according to iep.utm.edu/academy/ the Lyceum and the Synaxarches, that are functions that were for intellectual discussions as well as exercise and religious activities in the 5th century BC or BCE. At his academy, Plato taught his main philosophy, which was, according to plato.stanford.edu, was happiness or well-being at its highest aim of moral thought and conduct, and virtues that are the required skills of disposition needed to attain this state of mind. Dedicated scholars would meet up to discuss the nature of the universe, and other studies that were taught were mathematics, natural science, astronomy, dialectics, philosophy, and politics. Plato was from an aristocratic family and had moderate wealth, so he had the means, baby, and the funds, baby, to support his studies as well as his teachings. Plato did not charge tuition for people who came to be taught at his academy, and it is also documented that his teacher, Socrates, denied payment for his teachings as well. If early forms of education was free, then I wonder, when did we, how did we, why did we started paying for a decent education today? They have Plato's Academy in Clearwater, Florida. Tuition fees cost up to $6,000. What? So I wonder if the real Plato was alive walking around today, would he approve such trivial details? Now, let's figure out when the academy turned into a school or maybe even a college, and when did we start paying for education? The first and oldest standing high school is the Shishi High School in Chengdu, Xicheng, China, and was built between 143 and 141 BC or BCE. The building was constructed by the Han Dynasty governor or administrator of Shu Commandery, Wen Wing, and was made completely out of stone. The Shishi High School was built for the education and teaching of local functionaries. According to dictionary.com and other internet sources, a functionary is a person who functions in a specified capacity, especially in government service and official, civil servants, bureaucrat, and other functions. The knowledge learned in the capital was used to manage the society and promote the advanced education of the Central Plains. School was brought from China to Iran and the Middle East in about 200 AD. The Crusaders brought education from the Middle Eastern region to Europe in about late 500 AD. Europe formed the Boston Grammar School in 1555, and American adopted the idea from European schools and opened its first high school in 1635 called Boston Latin High School. This is how education made its way to America. Now let's highlight where a college came from and why we start calling certain schools colleges.
Thanks, Impact. So, the first university in the world was said to be founded by Fatima bint Muhammad al-Fariya al-Qurashiyya in 895 AD or CE in Fez, which is now known as Morocco. This actually started out as a mosque or Muslim place of worship, and after she died in 880 AD, this mosque was transformed into a full-blown university. Fun fact, when somebody looks up what the first university that was established, most references don't talk about the mosque. They more reference the university that was established, which is the University of Bologna in Italy, which was founded in 1088 AD. This is referenced to be the oldest university, and they coined this in their foundation's description. So, what was the first time we called schools colleges? Well, oddly enough, it was actually Harvard University in 1636. And its original name was actually New College. Now, we know what a scholar is, who we believe the first scholars were, and some of the history of most of the schools, but when did scholarships come about, and what is a scholar exactly? Well, a scholarship came from the word scholar and is a grant or a payment made to support a student's education, awarded on the basis of academics or other achievements. The first scholarship was said to be established in 1643 at Harvard College by Lady Anne Radcliffe Molson. Anne was the first female donor of Harvard University, and one of the terms for the scholarship stated, "The maintenance of some poor scholar which shall be admitted to Harvard University," meaning this was to help people who were poor. So, I guess with this information in the books, I wonder when did colleges or the NJCAA and the NCAA become a multi-billion-dollar corporation that we know today? Also, why is the scholarship selection process set up the way it is? What really doesn't make any sense is how can you monopolize education like how it's being done today?
Thanks, Lady K. Now, let's dig in a little deeper on how education got monopolized. Okay? You know, while we were trying to dig up information, I found that some websites have conflicting information about when people actually start paying for their tuition. It's like they're trying to cover up something. The first information I could find was from mythfact.com, which says that private and public universities in the United States have charged fees since Harvard was founded in 1636. But state universities actually were tuition free starting in 1825 and ending in the 1960s somewhere. Also, colleges never has been free. Y'all need to keep that in mind. But there are also never been an educational crisis centered around student loan and massive debt. That's crazy that tuition really started in the United States though, because I thought it started probably in Europe or something like that, but it started here first. Tuition fees weren't introduced in the United Kingdom until 1988, and at that time students were required to pay just a measly £1,000 a year for tuition. Private colleges sprang up in the United States before the American Revolution, and at that point tuition was relatively minimal and most people thought it was a good investment, so we didn't challenge the issue that much back then. In 1825, tuition-free state universities began to appear, and in the 1960s, when large number of college students became involved in the civil rights movement, they started to charge tuition. At that time, states began to cut funding from state universities across the nation, and they started charging tuition. In the 1960s, social and legislative change turned higher education into a business and started the student loan crisis. Federal student loan programs and other financial aid programs were created to ensure low-income people could still have access to college. Since then, financial aid was established and they said students had easy access to it. Both public and private universities started to hike up tuition fees. From 1976 to 2012, the average student tuition rose 1,120% faster than any other product and service in the U.S. It is said in 2011, for the first time in American history, state college funding was primarily from tuition paid by students instead of state funding. One more time, ladies and gentlemen. From 1976 to 2012, the average student tuition rose 1,120% faster than any other product in the United States. It is said in 2011, for the first time in American history, mind you, state college funding was primarily from tuition paid by students instead of state funding. Let that marinate. Well, to me, ladies and gentlemen, this is a tough one to swallow. The fact that most funding came from students. What happened to the states helping out their colleges? Let me get this thing back to Lady K so we can go over the conclusive facts about this topic. What do you got for us, Lady K?
Well, thanks, Impact. So, what is a student grant? The student grant programs are free financial aid that you're not required to pay back, but more than likely don't cover all of your tuition and fees. So I guess the bigger question to ask is, what is the difference between a grant and a scholarship? Well, according to creditdonkey.com and other internet sources, grants and scholarships are frequently called gift aid. Grants are considered a free gift that lowers the cost of students' qualified education expenses, but scholarships have to be paid back. When you look up the definition of the scholarship, you can see that sometimes people call scholarships grants, but they're actually two different things. This is the reason why some people believe scholarships are free money, when in fact grants are the free money and for the most part don't cover all of the students' tuition, fees such as books, housing, and living expenses such as their meals. According to demos.org and other internet sources, you can see from this chart, Black people and low-income students are more likely to borrow for an associate's degree, and I also read that the same was for a bachelor's degree as well. Also, Black people and lower income students, as this chart shows, are actually more likely to borrow more money and have more debt as well. One thing I really wanted to cover is the fact that free tuition only covers direct costs of attending college and not the total cost, which leaves many low-income students with harsh amounts of debt and entering a market where they might not be able to find a job right off the bat. Some schools say that they'll help you find a job, but as I can attest, after getting out of school with a degree in web design, in a small market like Nebraska, I received no help in finding a job and paying off my school. I paid it all by myself. I had to take out a loan and pay it back. So I am all too familiar with the student loan debt crisis we are living in nowadays. So what do you think, Impact?
Man, you know what, guys? My initial thought about this episode was about the student athlete football players in particular. Now, anybody who knows an Impact player, basketball is my favorite sport. So they got the G League and they're about to get rid of the one and done rule. But what about these football players that I mentioned before? Now I understand how this looks to the female student athletes, softball, soccer, but football is the primary cash cow for most colleges in America, and it seems like this idea of a scholarship is sticking everybody, but it's sticking them where it hurts the most. To sum it all up, we learned that the very first scholars, not only did they teach, but they were active learners studying to better themselves. These students of the game took on students themselves in order to uncover the mysteries of the world. We also learned that the very first high school came from the Chinese culture, and they threatened the whole order of imperial China, therefore they had to be burnt down. Thanks to the Muslims and consorted and other powers that be, this high school was restored, but by doing so, the Crusaders stole the idea of educations from the Muslims and integrated it into European culture. Since we should know our American history, when England, France, and Spain took over North America and the United States, they also established schools here. Upon establishing schools in America, to actually pay for tuition at any level is an American concept. But the biggest takeaway is, are scholarships really free? Hopefully. Please, thank God, hopefully. If you made it this far into the episode, then you're probably just as shocked to find out that scholarship, just like everything else in America, isn't free. Not at all. Not even in the slightest. Also, if you're a person of color, like the impact player, then it is probably that much harder for us to get documentation in order to get a better job. Although I grew up knowing this, I must admit that this is still one of the toughest pills to swallow today. Lady Karus, do you have any thoughts?
Thanks, Impact. So, actually, we have a very special guest today, my sister, and she is on the air right now, live with us. She couldn't actually be here with us today, but we do have her talking to us today live about her experience with scholarships and grants. And I just want to say hi, sis.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
I'm glad to hear it. So, I asked you today to come here to discuss again scholarships or grants that you might have received to go to college. So, let me dig right in and ask you some questions. So, let's go ahead and start off with, what school did you go to? How long did you go to school? And what did you major in?
I went to UNK for approximately 5 years. I ended with a major in family studies and a minor in art.
Well, that sounds like an interesting degree. So, my next question for you is, who told you about scholarships and grants and got you to apply for one?
I went to Cozad High School where our guidance counselor actually had a full list online for us, so we could click through and read about different scholarships and grants that might be available for us. And that's how I accessed the Susan Thompson Buffett Scholarship, which is what I actually received.
So, your guidance counselor actually had a very big role in you applying for these. So, I wonder if they taught you everything you were getting yourself into at the time. My next question is, how did you qualify for the scholarship or grant, and how long did it take you to find out if you got it or not?
So I don't remember exactly how long it took for me to find out that I received the scholarship. I don't think it took more than a couple of weeks at most, but I just basically received an email and it said that I had received the scholarship.
Well, that actually seems pretty quick to me. What did your scholarship or grant actually cover? Meaning, did it cover fees, tuition, books, and living expenses? What did it cover?
The Buffett scholarship mostly just covered your tuition and fees. Um, if there was any left over, then they wouldn't just take that from you. You'd be able to continue to use that for room and board or whatever else you needed to use it for. I know that after so long, they did end up allotting us an additional $500 for books. And I think that that's just with the tuition and fees being raised and stuff at UNK, and just to try to help us out a little bit more.
So, there were actually other fees on top of what they said they were going to cover. So, did you complete your schooling, and why or why not?
I did not end up finishing school. I believe I was there for 4.5 years because I did drop out after the fall semester of my 5th year. And that was mostly just for personal reasons. Just wasn't something that was working out for me emotionally or mentally or anything like that. So I just had to do what was best for me and take a break or stop indefinitely.
The way and what I believe is sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And if it's dependent on your own health, then you got to do what's best for you. And I'm so glad that you're here today, sister, because I love you. And I'm glad that you get to talk to us today about your scholarships and this information. And really get to tell the audience your story. So, my next question to you is, how much debt do you have now because of school?
Even though I had the Susan Thompson Buffett scholarship, like I said, it only covered tuition and fees. I mean, I shouldn't say only because that is a good chunk of what I would have had to pay, but room and board is still really expensive, so I ended up having over $30,000 in debt. I don't know where I'm at right now, but I've been making like the minimum payments on that. And fortunately, even though I dropped out, they're not making me repay any of what they paid for. So in the long run, you know, it was a great scholarship, and I was very, very, very thankful for it.
Thanks so much, sis, for the information. And last but not least, I do want to ask you one final question. So, what advice do you have for somebody that might be choosing to apply for a scholarship or grant?
I think that if your school doesn't have something like that for you, then you're just going to have to do your own research, obviously. I don't know what that would entail because I didn't have to do it, and I didn't know anything about that stuff back in high school. I still really don't. So, you know, I don't really have much advice on that front, but I think that if you have a school counselor, which everybody should, then, you know, just go to them, talk to them, see what they can recommend for you. You know, they're going to be the ones that help you with college visits and stuff, so they should be able to help you with all that stuff in the long run, and as well as when you do college visits, you know, speaking with them on what they might have available and things like that. I mean, we got Google now, so you just use some Google.
So, I just want to say thank you once again, sis, for joining us today. Really excited that we got to have you here today. And I really want to thank you again for answering all of my questions, whether they were hard or not. And I hope the viewers today actually get some use out of the advice that you gave. And I think they will. Anyone trying to get a scholarship or grant and decide if they're financially ready for schooling. And with all this being said, I think it is fair to say that this is a grant worded as a scholarship. And we can see that it's definitely not free, especially since you're coming out of it with over $30,000 in debt, along with them changing the stipulations partway through. Now, I'm going to give this back to Impact to close this episode. And thanks again. Bye, sis. Love you. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, sis.
In closing, please don't forget to visit us at our website at www.theallstargang.witsite.com/the All-Star Gang. You need help with the spelling? Here it is. And thank you for joining us in another very exciting episode of You Don't Jazz No Berries. Until next time.